Hey everyone, so I've decided to try to get a couple of short standalone episodes out this weekend. And this first one is going to be me covering a recent Live Science article that really grabbed my attention. It's about a so called bog body that was recently discovered in Denmark. And I've been fascinated by the bog body phenomenon for a long time now. I can remember being young and watching documentaries about them. If you're not familiar, they're basically the bodies of people who either accidentally drowned in a peat bog or were intentionally sacrificed or killed and then placed or left in a bog. The tannins in the bog would preserve the bodies and give them an almost leathery texture or appearance. Some of the more well-known examples include Tolland Man, also discovered in Denmark and thought to date back to the 5th century BC. And then there's also Lindo Man. I'm tempted to say Lindau, but I think it's Lindo. A British bog body thought to date back somewhere between 2 BC and early 2nd century AD, so kind of teetering on the line of the Bronze Age and the Romano-British period. And I think Lindo Man was an apparent victim of so called overkilling, or possibly even the quote unquote threefold death or triple death. Another concept that when I first learned about it, I found it really mysterious and fascinating. It's a concept that seems to be found across cultures, but it's often associated with the ancient Celts and other ancient European civilizations. It's a kind of ritualistic death or sacrifice that includes three different forms of killing. In Lindo Man's case, some suggest the threefold death may have consisted of being garroted or garroted, strangled with a garrote, bludgeoned on the head, and having his neck stabbed or slit. And I recently read that he also may have been stabbed in the chest as well, but I'm not sure about the validity of that claim. And it may have been in that same article, but I also read someone suggest that what appears to be a slit or stab wound in the neck may have been naturally caused by post-mortem bloating or just the decomposition process. Well, decomposition, he was preserved via, the tannins in the peat bog. So I'm not sure what the validity of that suggestion is either. And it's interesting to note that Tolland Man and Lindo Man were both found with cords or nooses still around their necks. Lindo Man had a sinew cord around his neck, and I believe Tolland Man had a noose of plaited hide around his neck. I think in Denmark alone, more than 500 of these bog bodies have been found over the years, and it's pretty common for them to display multiple signs of violent injury. I also think there's some debate over the nature of their social status and death. Were they important or well respected people who willingly underwent ritual sacrifice, or were they criminals or outcasts who were violently murdered and dumped in bogs? But in some cases, like with Tolland Man, the bodies appear to have been placed or deposited with some care. He was found placed in the fetal position, and it appears that his eyes and mouth may have been deliberately closed by someone else, probably as a show of respect or as part of proper preparation for interment. And respectfully burying bodies in the fetal position is nothing new. I almost said ancient, but actually it goes all the way back to prehistory. I believe even the Neanderthals or Neanderthal, tomato, it's thought that they buried their dead in the fetal position, at least in some instances. But let's finally read from this article. And so it was published 4 days ago. It's the 18th as I'm recording this. And it's by Tom Metcalf, and it's entitled 5,000-Year-Old Bog Body Found in Denmark May Be a Human Sacrifice Victim. Archaeologists have discovered the ancient skeletal remains of a so-called bog body in Denmark, near the remnants of a flint axe and animal bones, clues that suggest this person was ritually sacrificed more than 5,000 years ago. Little is known so far about the supposed victim, including the person's sex and age at the time of death. But the researchers think the body was deliberately placed in the bog during the Neolithic or New Stone Age. That's the early phase of the Danish Neolithic, said excavation leader Emil Struve, an archaeologist and curator at the ROMU, Museums in Roskilde. We know that traditions of human sacrifices date back that far. We have other examples of it. Dozens of so-called bog bodies have been found throughout northwestern Europe, particularly in Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands, and Britain, where human sacrifices in bogs seem to have persisted for several thousand years. And here's another quote. In our area here, we have several different bog bodies, Struve told Live Science. It's an ongoing tradition that goes back all the way to the Neolithic. The ROMU archaeological team, and I'm going to be honest, I don't know exactly what that acronym stands for, but I know it has to do with a series of museums in Roskilde, which I think is on the island of Zealand, which is a part of Denmark. But anyway, the ROMU archaeological team found the latest set of bones in October, ahead of the construction of a housing development. The site, which has now been drained, had been a bog near the town of Stenløse. I'm definitely butchering that, but I'm doing my best. On the large island of Zealand and just northwest of the Danish capital of Copenhagen, Danish law requires archaeologists to examine all land that's to be built on. And the first bones of the Stenløse bog body were found during a test excavation at the site, Struve said. The archaeologists will now fully excavate the site in the spring, when the ground has thawed after winter, but the initial excavations have revealed leg bones, a pelvis, and part of a lower jaw with some teeth still attached. The other parts of the body lay outside a protective layer of peat in the bog, and were not preserved, he noted. Struve hopes the sex of the body can be determined based on the pelvis, and that wear on the teeth may indicate the individual's age. In addition, the teeth could be sources of ancient DNA, which might reveal even more about the person's identity, he said. Struve's, I hope I'm getting that right, Struve, said the flint axe head found near the body was not polished after it was made, and may never have been used, and so it seems likely that this too was a deliberate offering. The oldest bog body in the world, known as Kohlberg Man, was found in Denmark in the 1940s, and may date to 10,000 years ago, while others date to the Iron Age in the region from about 2,500 years ago. One of the most famous and best preserved bog bodies is Tolland Man, who we talked about earlier, who was found on Denmark's Jutland Peninsula in 1950 and is thought to have been sacrificed in about 400 BC. A few of the bog bodies seem to have been accident victims who drowned after they fell in the water, but archaeologists think most were killed deliberately, perhaps as human sacrifices at times of famines or other disasters. Miranda Aldhouse Green, a professor emeritus of history, archaeology, and religion at Cardiff University in the UK, and the author of the book Bog Bodies Uncovered, Solving Europe's Ancient Mystery, and it looks like the book was from Thames and Hudson, 2015, said ancient people were likely well aware that bogs could preserve bodies. And here's a quote, "If you put a body in the bog, it would not decay. It would stay between the worlds of the living and the dead." And so once again, if most of them are deliberate sacrifices, it brings up the question, how many of them were willing human sacrifices, respected people, maybe even nobles who offered themselves up, or, were there cases where people sacrificed criminals and outcasts against their will? I don't know. That's an interesting question. But with that, I'm going to call this mini episode a wrap, and as always, thank you for listening.